What is up, world? It's your boy Ton, and you are listening to the Wonton Wealth Podcast. Here, I'm going to unravel anything and everything commercial real estate related. And more importantly, we're going to add abundant value. So if you're ready, buckle up your eardrums. All right, welcome back, people. Today I got Scott Carson with me. He is into note investing, something I know nothing about, so I'm going to learn a ton today. Hopefully you guys learn a ton as well. Scott, for our audience, could you give us a little background, a little synopsis of who you are, what you're doing, and how that relates to commercial real estate?
Sure. Glad to be here today. First and foremost, honored as always. And if you guys are here listening, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a 5-star review right now. We don't wait till the end. Let's do it right now. But I'm out of Austin, Texas, and I'm known across the country as the note guy. And I got started like many people in real estate. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. But I actually went and bought a rental property or two and fell flat in my face. Started to get into following Ron LeGrand and some other folks and started diving into doing real estate the right way of investing. And I had a mentor, a guy by the name of Bob Leonardi and Jay Mikhailov, that I worked with for about 4 years doing mortgages. I was originating mortgages on residential commercial properties for real estate investors all across the country. And they had kind of taught me the note business. They were not only on the residential, but the commercial side. And when everything hit the fan in 2008, I saw an opportunity instead of where everybody was struggling, losing houses and foreclosures and stuff like that. I went the route and started buying debt instead of properties. And so I started buying distressed mortgages on residential and commercial properties, multifamily stuff, and strip malls, and you name any type of commercial or residential asset, I've bought a mortgage on it at some point and either held it or worked it or stuff like that. But that's what I've done the last really 15 years is hang my head on just buying distressed debt here in the United States in about 20 to 30 different states. I get my stuff direct from banks on a regular basis so that I can cherry pick. I don't have to buy everything. Anywhere, we're here to talk about commercial real estate. So anywhere, like I just got in a list of notes of some small balance multifamily stuff, anywhere from a 5-plex in Chicago all the way up to about a 100-unit apartment complex in Indianapolis. I like being the bank. I do this from anywhere in the country. I don't necessarily want to own real estate, so it's a little bit of a different mindset being the banker versus the actual property owner. But I love it, man. Bought over $1 billion in debt, and I'm very, very excited with what's going on in the market when many people are scared right now.
Love that. So you started actually flipping homes, and then you went to the origination side of it, and then that's when you started to buy notes based on essentially from mentorships, learning how to do it, right? So for any of us who doesn't know what a note is, could you explain to us what that really is?
Yeah, sure. It's easy. Everybody's already in the note business. They're just on the wrong side of the payment streams most of the time. So if you've got a mortgage on your house, or you've got a car note or student loan debt, or you owe Capital One or Visa, you've got a note that you're just making payments on. And what I'm talking about a note, I'm not necessarily talking about like most people when they hear about the note business, when they think of real estate, they think about, oh, you're going to go own or finance a property. You're either going to sell on terms or buy on terms. You're going to create a mortgage. And that is one niche of kind of note investing. I'm a little bit different. I'm only one of like 3 people in the country that teach this. But what I do is I buy mortgages direct from the lenders. And so when I buy that mortgage note, usually the borrower hasn't paid in 6 months to 6 years or longer. It just varies a little bit. And so when we buy that note, I don't own the property. I'm literally becoming the lender is the best way to look at it. We're taking over the lending side of the business. Now, a lot of people are like, well, Scott, don't you want to buy the real estate? And I'm like, well, no. Now, while I'm buying, I don't know if you guys can see this, but your video can. So I'm holding a collateral file. This is a note. This is a mortgage doc with all the different information in it that I do for due diligence. But when I bought that note, I now became the bank, and I can modify the loan with the lender. I could try to work out payment plan for them. I have all the same exact rights the lender does. And if the borrower doesn't pay, they stay. You know what I mean? But my biggest goal isn't necessarily to take property back. About 70% of the time, we're actually able to kind of work out a payment plan with the borrowers. If you think back to what happened in COVID, a lot of people stopped paying because they were out of work and had to work from home, and the government went in and said, oh, you can't foreclose. That was a time that was a little tricky for me, but we still had about 80% of our borrowers paying on time anyway. So when we buy the debt, yes, it does. We could technically foreclose if they borrow won't play ball with us, take the property back, but that's actually 70% of the time I actually like to just hold for payments because if I can get the bar back track working, it's cash flow for me without having to rehab the property or foreclose or deal with toilet stints and trash outs, which I hate doing. Does that make sense?
I hear you. I hear you. I was in residential for a while, so I know exactly what you mean. Let's rewind a little bit to the first note that you ever closed. Can you walk us through that? What did that look like, and what lessons did you actually learn from it?
So let's talk about the first note I ever bought. You want to do a commercial or a residential because they're both
Let's
a
do
little bit different.
commercial.
Okay, so commercial. So I'd already been flipping and wholesaling some residential notes from like Banco Popular on like property and like Detroit for $500 or wholesaling a note here and there. But I started. It's a kind of a funny story. I was targeting a 4-unit strip mall here in Austin, Texas, where I live. I'm like, man, I really want that, and I was making an offer, and then I find out from the listing agent that the note had been sold. I'm like, okay, mortgage was sold, and they worked it out with the bar. The bar didn't have to sell anymore. So I jumped on the county records, and I tracked down that it was Greenpoint Mortgage that held the note, which is Capital One's commercial lending side. So then I started dialing for dollars, calling, like trying to get a hold of the right person in the right bank at Capital One. And I track all my phone calls, my call blitzes. So it was like 70 phone calls I counted up over 3 weeks of dialing, getting transferred. Eventually I get a hold of the right person, this lady named Amy out of New York. And she's like, yeah, we'll sell some of our notes. I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And she sent me this PDF spreadsheet. And I still have it. I saved this 33-page PDF with all of their stuff that's under $1 million balance and commercial stuff all across the United States. It was like in 3-point font or 6-point font. I couldn't hardly read it. I had to get like a magnifying glass to read it. And on it, I see this 8-unit apartment complex in San Diego off of Abrams Street. This is a street, just a small apartment, small single family, like duplexes, fourplexes, eightplexes near San Diego State area. And I was like, okay. Well, first of all, I can't buy all of these. And Amy's like, no, just buy one. Just buy one, okay? So give you the numbers on it. The value from the bank was at $750. It's what they figured as far as appraisal. This goes back a few years, obviously. It was fully occupied. Borrower hadn't paid in over a year. Why the bank hadn't started the foreclosure process, I don't know, but they were too busy with the bigger stuff, if that makes sense, okay? Borrowed $548 and some change. They were willing to sell the note to me at $375 at a sizable discount for what's owed, but really just over 50 cents on the dollar of value at the point. And so I get this under contract. I'm like, great, but I don't have the $375, right? And I asked for 60 days. They gave me 45 days for due diligence and closing because I was buying the note. I'm like, okay. So I just started marketing. I mean, I did an email blast at my database. I started calling my friends in San Diego in the real estate. I ended up flipping that note on that commercial 8-plex for a quick 35 grand profit 2 weeks later. You know what I mean? And he was happy. The guy that bought it, Matt Harder, he was happy. He ended up getting a full payoff from the borrower 9 months later at $548. So he was pretty stoked about it too. Of course, if the borrower hadn't played ball, he would have foreclosed, and then he held an 8-plex that was worth $750 and more. I look back at now, it's like a $2 million, $3 million property, 15 years later. But hey, 35 grand to me back then was big money in 2 weeks. You know what I mean? And we've done that a lot of times. That was a $1 million relationship with Capital One because that we went on then to buy a 300-unit apartment complex in Indianapolis that we sold. That we took a 21-unit back in Houston that we regentrified. We bought an 8-plex in West Palm Beach that we took over receivership and then sold it at auction. And so that's one of the great things that I love about the note business is I don't necessarily have to go out and chase deals. Banks send me lists or they send us lists on a regular basis that we can cherry pick from most of the time. And but that's the great thing is we get deals in. We know they're motivated. We get a lot of information from the bank and the lender, and then gives us the opportunity to really make a great return without having to actually own the property management, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. When we're looking at notes, it's obviously a lot different from your traditional real estate. It's not the building, it's not the land. It's a piece of paper from a lender to a lendee, right? It highlights all the terms there. And it's also untraditional that you don't have kind of like an MLS to look for deals, right? So, and you kind of alluded to this, that to find these deals, you kind of have to build up a relationship with these banks, and you kind of have to build up your database of all these lenders. Would that be the correct assumption?
Yeah, it's just like anything else. I mean, if you wanted to get into buying apartments, who are you going to start reaching out to? Apartment realtors, right? Starting joining apartment groups. That's what I had to start doing, was reaching out to bankers and finding the right departments. If you're on LinkedIn right now, you could literally go over to LinkedIn and type in like whole loan traders, and it'll pull up a list of people at different institutions that sell loan portfolios, or special asset manager or secondary marketing manager. Those are the department names that these big banks have. And they even like commercial special asset manager. So like when I contact the bank, first of all, I'm looking on LinkedIn for a right person. Like, let's just say Bank of the West special assets manager. Well, I know that's Dana White, not the guy that works for, as an Ultimate Fighting Championship. It's actually a lady named Dana White, right? And I've known her for about 10 years, but I was able to call the main switchboard, main corporate office of Bank of the West, and say, hey, who's in charge of your special assets for your commercial notes? And they put me through to her. And now Dana sends me a list of everything that Bank of the West has once every quarter. And we buy some stuff. Sometimes we don't buy. It just varies. But yeah, it's all about doing. But it's a whole lot cheaper leveraging LinkedIn or jumping on some of these different servicing websites versus dropping thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in direct mail campaigns. A lot of investors do. You know what I mean? One big caveat is we're looking in about 20 to 30 states. So you have to expand your network and your mindset that way versus just focus on like your own backyard. So there's a couple big differences for you.
Gotcha. So let's go into the little bit of the nitty gritty. For someone who's like new to note investing or knows nothing about note investing, can you break down the general 30,000 foot overview process of buying a distressed note from a bank? Obviously, first off, you got to have that relationship via LinkedIn, cold calling, direct mail, etc.
No direct mail. We're
No direct
gonna
mail.
kill direct mail here. We're not gonna kill Amazon for us with this. Okay, we're gonna do it all. It's the 21st century. You're gonna be a real estate investor in the 21st century. Let's work smart. So leverage LinkedIn, leverage some tools like Dripify or Octopus to automate your connection requests with these asset managers and find it, because that's what it comes down to. It's just literally like shooting a shotgun against the side of a barn. Further out, I'm gonna have a lot more opportunity versus trying to just one bank at a time. So when you get in, and I'd always help folks start off with buy a residential note. It's basically the same process of buying a note, whether it's residential, commercial, so you don't have a lot of money involved and get the ball rock and rolling. Yes, you can cherry pick residential notes too. But when you get in this list, this Excel spreadsheet, they call it a tape, you're going to look at the areas that you like. You're going to look at your property types. You're going to look at, what I look at is the property, or is the property occupied first and foremost? Is there any cash flow coming off of it as far as mortgage payments? If there's not, is it occupied or vacant? What kind of condition is the property in as far as kind of value? The great thing about buying notes too is that we kind of see beneath the kimono, as I like to say, is that we're getting these servicing notes from the actual bank, so we can see if the borrower has been friendly, or if the borrower's been trying to do a workout program, or if the borrower told the bank just to go pound sand and F off. We know that on the front end side. So that works well. And then it's all about looking at not only the value of the property, condition of the property, but then looking at, two, the borrower, if it's an LLC or a person, what's their credit worthiness, what's their payment history been like, what did it look for? And then, of course, then we dive into the actual collateral file, or all the documents there as far as like the mortgage, the note, any assignment of mortgages. Has it been sold 2 or 3 times? What happened with the sale? And then if it's already in a legal process, foreclosure, which varies state by state, we'll actually speak to the attorney who's handling that file and saying, hey, how long do you have to foreclose? What's been going on? Has the foreclosure process been started? Why hasn't it been started yet? And every state's a little bit different. Like Texas, we can do things faster in 30 days. Whereas if you try to foreclose in New York State, it's like 3+ years. So we avoid the longer foreclosure states, if that makes sense to you. But then it's, you're evaluating the risk. Let's just use some simple numbers. The note's non-performing on a property, and let's use simple numbers. Say the value's $200,000. They owe $210 or $220 because they haven't paid in a while. But if I can go in and buy that note at 50 cents on the dollar and pick it up for $100, that gives me a lot of flexibility to make money on this. So if it's like a, say, a 7% interest rate on that mortgage note, well, if I'm buying that note at 50 cents on the dollar and I can reach out to the bar and say, hey, just start paying on time again. I know you're behind by 2 years or 3 years or COVID, but can you start paying on time again? If they start paying, that's a 14% cash and cash return to me right off the bat. If I get them to bring some skin in the game, some back payments a little bit, not the full like 2 years or 3 years, that could really easily shoot me up into high double digits, if high teens or 20% or greater. And that's a great, great thing. Now, if they won't play ball, I foreclose, and now I can sell an asset at the foreclosure auction for under 200. I'm into it for 105, 110 with legal costs. There's plenty of meat there for me to sell at the foreclosure auction. Or if I do want to own that asset and add it to my portfolio, I'll just take it to the foreclosure and do a full credit bid. Nobody's going to pay $212 for a $200,000 asset, right? So now I own that asset and can operate it and do what I want with it. I prefer to get borrowers back on track, because if they make 12 months of on-time payments, that asset, that mortgage note, is now considered reperforming. I could then turn around and sell it back to Wall Street or other investors at 80, 90 cents on the dollar. If I bought it for 100, I get a year plus of payments, and now I can sell around and sell it at 180, 190, 170. That's a pretty good ROI without having to do any operations or fix and flips or stuff like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the first thing you mentioned is that you're in various states, like 30 of them, right? Now, one of the things you look for is the condition of the property. Do you fly out there to go visit the property, or you just kind of do do you have boots on the ground to check it out, or what's your process there?
So when I get a listing, I don't ever drive by a property unless it's like locally here. I'm in Austin, Texas, so within an hour I'll drive by. But most of the time, I'll just look at online information, because the great thing about bidding on a note is the bank knows you're not going to be able to fly out and go look at all 30 properties, right? So what I'll do is look at the online values that we can find. Yes, we'll use that hated website LoopNet or Zillow, Google Maps, just to get a feel for things, because usually there'll be the original appraisal in the file. And we'll make what's called an indicative offering, knowing that if our bid's accepted and we are in a true due diligence period, we're going to have time then to send an agent or boots on the ground out to drive by the property, take photos. If it's, a sizable chunk of asset, I'll jump on fly out and walk it too if we need to. But we've bought, I've bought thousands of residential deals that I never even looked at myself. It was always realtors, pulling a BPO and taking photos for me. Your commercial assets, you can do a little bit of that, but you all and I both know, like, you're buying a multifamily apartment deal, you want to definitely go out and probably walk it in a lot of cases. You want to, depend on, especially if it's vacant, you definitely want to get out and walk it and see what condition. But if it's occupied and there's some sort of payment history or depending on how friendly the borrower is, you can often get away without having to do any of that.
Certainly. And now you've mentioned that, some of these notes you're buying for 50 cents on the dollar, right? And then you can either restructure it in some way or take over ownership and then resell it for 80, 90 cents on the dollar. From the initial conversation that you've had with the original lender on the note, what is your conversation like with them in order to purchase this note for 50 cents on the dollar? And I know you mentioned a couple of bidding scenarios and whatnot, but do you kind of just negotiate with them, or what does that look like?
So I'll give it a great example. I was buying a 12-unit apartment complex in West Palm Beach back in the day. And the lender actually called me from a referral from another banker. And he wanted like 90 cents on the dollar. And it was 1st of October. I'm like, I'm not paying 90 cents on the dollar for a non-performing note. Not going to do it. I'll give you 70 cents on the dollar for this one. Oh, no, I couldn't take that. I'm like, okay, fine. So 30 days later, I called him back up. Hey, man, have you sold that note on that West Palm Beach? No, man. I still got it. I said, well, my 70%. Oh, no, we can only go like 85 cents on the dollar. I'm like, nope. Same thing. Sometimes my deals take 90 to 120 days of follow-up and just following up. Because here's the thing. There's a lot of bankers and asset managers smoking a lot of wacky tobacco crack out there right now. They think their asset's worth one thing. They got their head shoved so far up there. You know what I mean? They don't make any sense. And me, I'm like, I know this asset isn't worth what you're telling me. It's way upside down. I'm going to have to foreclose to wipe out the equity and all the mechanics liens that are behind your first lien. I'm only willing to offer this. And so it's back and forth. Eventually, especially at the end of the year, depending on how that bank's portfolio looks, if they got more non-performing stuff, every non-performing note costs them 10 to 20 times what they're making on the payments in leverage and being able to lend it out. So they're often motivated, especially as we get to the fourth quarter or the first quarter of the year, to get stuff off their books at a bigger discount. So that's just like, took 120 days with this guy going back and forth, and he finally settled on my 70 cents on the dollar, provided that I could fund before the end of the year. I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm ready to fund tomorrow. I've already done all my due diligence knowing we're going to sell this damn thing. So it's back and forth. Follow-up is key and everything. I mean, I'll give you a great example. Another one, lender sent me 10 notes on some multifamily stuff. I came in at 60 cents on the dollar. He came back, oh, no, you got to buy the whole thing at 90 cents, all or nothing. And I just laughed at him. I'm like, you're not going to sell this because there's like a 20 unit in New York City that's way upside down. Nobody wants to buy that stuff. Something in New Jersey, another crappy apartment in Chicago that looks like it was the fiveplex at time forgot. I'm like, you're not going to sell this all or nothing. You can want it. You can want one hand and achieve the other. So it's just on my follow-up spot. I'll give you this one on that one. If you want me to buy it all or nothing, then I'm going to put a big buy for zero on the New York stuff because you can't give that stuff away right now. You know what I mean? So it's just follow-up like with anything else, and that's where most of the money is made, is in the follow-up. I would probably say 50% of the deals that we've closed have all come 30 days after our bid was either declined, or we weren't the highest bid, and then during the due diligence period, a previous buyer, another buyer fell out because they didn't like what they found and moved on. So this is like anything else. Just got to put your systems in place for follow-up.
And to piggyback off the due diligence process here, you mentioned a few things here. You're essentially playing the bank as you are underwriting the borrower in and of itself or themselves, looking at their probably their PFS and their payment history, things like that. Could you give us a little bit more of a peek behind the curtain on that due diligence process?
Yeah, exactly. So with anything, we're going to order a broker price opinion, having a realtor go out and give us a comps. What's its value is in current condition. That's the first thing. We're going to pull title, do a title report. We don't need to pull a full brand new title from creation of the property. We just go back to when the previous loan was originating. So it's usually like a 2-owner report we pull, or an ONE report. That's going to tell us what kind of stuff is owed on taxes and liens and stuff like that. It's an important thing. Of course, we'll check property taxes, the county, make sure those are paid up to date. And then it is getting literally in the spreadsheet with the servicing notes with the back and forth from the borrower to the seller. Most times you're not going to be able to actually call the seller and talk with them until you own the note. Because, I mean, sometimes you get permission, but that's why you look at the servicing notes, because the borrower will often tell the previous lender what they want to try to accomplish. I'd like to try to modify this, or I don't want to own this more. With rates going up, I can't refinance out. You know what I mean? I'm upside down because my interest rate went from 3 to 9%. So those are some things you can tell. And of course, you're going to get the original file, the original appraisal, like you said, the personal financial statements, what's going on with that stuff. And, if you're dealing directly with a bank, on times they'll tell you, like, hey, this borrower's got a great relationship with us, banking relationship with us. We don't want to foreclose, so we're willing to sell it to you so you can be the bad guy. I'm like, I don't mind being the bad guy because I'll come out the good guy after all. And so it's just going through that. You're going to have 30 to 60 to 90 days, depending on how big the asset is or how many assets you're buying. Sometimes you'll get up to 6 months. I mean, we all know commercial moves a little bit slower than residential stuff, so it takes a while to look at stuff. I mean, and I always joke, the hairier the asset, the bigger the discount. So the bigger the pain in the ass the borrower is, or how troubled it is, or what's going on with that property. I was looking at a note down in Corpus Christi, Texas. It was 150 units. Kind of a rough part of town. There was a fire, so 30 of the units were basically vacant, need to be completely rehabbed. That's something that I wouldn't have seen looking at a spreadsheet. I had to basically, drive down and take a look at it. But that came up during the due diligence process, and we approached the lender and said, "Listen, you didn't tell me that 30 of these units had caught fire. You know what I mean? I need to reduce my bid down." And they're all, well, we don't want to reduce that much. I'm like, well, then here you go. You can own this gang-ridden, burnt out apartment complex. No. Okay. All right. How big a discount do we need to give you now? I'm like, well, this is what you need to give us, and go from there.
So it sounds like a lot of times with these banks or lenders, I should say, they're just to get these underperforming assets off their books, they're willing to give a pretty good sized chunk of discount. right?
Yeah, it all depends on the lender, depending on where they're at in their portfolio. So if like the banks, if you're dealing with like a FDIC chartered bank, okay, there's about 5,000 licensed bank institutions out there. They've all got to submit a quarterly report to the FDIC. And on that quarterly report, it tells you how much in distress they have, how much of their residential portfolio is upside down, or how far behind on average, their portfolio is, or what percentage of the assets is compared to the overall lending amount. You get some banks that hold paper, it's worthless, right now. It's pretty sad that these banks are way upside down with the paper. So that gives you some sort of negotiation tactic. Like, hey, I know you got $700 million in non-performing debt right now. I can alleviate that by taking some of the stuff off your books, but you got to work with me on it. You know what I mean? And if you got dealing with a small one-off bank branch, they're not going to take too big a discount because they can't afford to. They just don't have the lending and the deposit relationships to do that. So we like to target that, five branches or more size. You could buy commercial stuff from like a Bank of America, Chase, or Citi, but they're usually going to have a independent separate department for that, not like the traditional bank. Like Wells Fargo has a thing called Wells Fargo Multifamily. And if you didn't read the quarterly reports, you wouldn't know it was there, right? So like walking into the Wells Fargo bank, I want to buy your notes. They're not going to know what the hell you're talking about, So that's why you got to speak the lingo, and I don't, you got to call and talk to the main corporate office most of the part, and know, it's not that difficult. I always say it's kind of like waking up and going from being blind to now being able to see the world in a whole different picture. You know what I mean? Well, there's a lot of opportunities around here that I didn't think about beforehand. I just didn't know.
And that's a wrap. If you've made it this far, that means you've listened to the entire episode, so thank you. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening from. And if you've learned something or found it useful, share it with one of your homies. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm pretty active on IG. My handle is pro_TANH. Reach out, let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, or what you want to hear about in the future. I'm here to tailor this to you. Until next time.